On this episode of Fish Quest, we're going to be making beaver tail bait to catch fish through the ice. Let's do it.
Hey, welcome back to our channel, or welcome for the first time. If you haven't already done so, if you could subscribe to our channel, it would mean the world to us. So, without further ado, let's get into the video. Travis, what in the heck is beaver tail bait, you ask? Well, beaver tail bait is exactly what it sounds like. Beaver tail bait is a natural bait that comes from a beaver tail. So, I choose to use beaver tail bait in the winter when ice fishing because the bait has amazing movement and can be finessed for picky, finicky fish. I choose to run beaver tail bait over most soft plastics for many reasons that we will get into. Typically, I'll harvest a beaver at least once a year, and one of the many products that comes from the beaver is tail bait. Tools needed to make beaver tail bait include a fresh beaver tail, sharp knives, cardboard, and a bench vise. So let's start with the first item, beaver tail. Every winter, I will trap at least one beaver to make beaver tail bait. If you are not a trapper, you more than likely know a trapper or might be able to find one in your local community via social media or word of mouth. Most trappers don't use the tail and would probably gladly give you one. Next, you're going to need at least a sharp fillet knife. I can't say enough good things about my set of Havalons. I have both the Piranha and the Barracuda. If you aren't familiar with Havalon, Havalon is a brand of knife that offers disposable, interchangeable, razor-sharp blades. Watch any of my other videos and you will see that my Havalons are constantly by my side. If you are interested in a knife like these, check out the link in the description. Next, you'll need a small piece of cardboard. Click on my link for the Havalon knives and I guarantee you they'll send you out some cardboard with the knife. All jokes aside, I use the cardboard to protect the leather of the tail from the bench vise. I use the tail leather to make wallets, sheaths, and other things. If you don't care to keep the beaver tail leather, then feel free to skip this step. Lastly, you'll need a bench vise. The bench vise is used to clamp the tail hide so you can pull the hide from the tail, exposing the beaver tail bait below. Okay, so now that we have the tool list covered, let's get right into the nitty-gritty of how to make beaver tail bait. Step 1. Cut around the edge of the tail. As you can see, I started at the base of the tail and I start doing shallow cuts along the edge of the tail. I use my left index finger to push the tail flat against the cutting board. That way I can feel with my right hand where I need to run the blade. The goal is to run the blade perfectly down the center of the edge of the tail. As I get closer to the end of the tail, I will need to go much slower because the tip is thinner. The goal if you're keeping the hide is to get 2 perfect halves of the tail to make leather. Next, you will need to do approximately 1-inch deep cuts on both sides of the tail to make room for the vise to grab a hold. Simply insert the knife and follow the curvature of the base of the tail. Flip over and repeat. Next, you will insert the cardboard into the cuts we just made. Again, the cardboard is simply just to protect the leather from the vise and the vise from getting fat and grease on it. Next, you will firmly clamp the cardboard and tail into the vise. After clamping the tail in the vise, you will grab the part of the tail that's not clamped. You will need to pull steadily and firmly, which will peel the hide from the tail. Then, you will repeat the last step again on the other side of the tail. Just a heads up, the last half is going to be slightly harder because you only have the slippery tail fat to hold on to. Next, this is where the fillet knife comes in handy. I will lay my fillet knife flat and cut the fat, or bait as we'll now call it, from the hide of the tail. You will want to keep the filleted bait as thick as possible and not mince it, because this is what we will use to make bait. I try to be systematic while filleting. I'll start on one side and work to the next, and then from one side of the tail to the other. For those of you who later plan to have the tails tanned, what I'll do with these is I'll put both the flesh sides together and vacuum seal, after which I'll put it in the freezer to keep it until a later time when I'm ready to tan. I'll do what is called a bark tan on these tails, which is a whole other video on a different channel at a later time. So if that's something that interests you, go ahead and subscribe and stay tuned for that. The core of the tail has a lot of bait on it, which should not go to waste. The tail of the beaver is just an extension of the spine, so when you're cutting the bait from the tail, be careful not to hit the vertebrae. The last step in making beaver tail bait is to simply cut the bait to the desired length, shape, and size. I will then go ahead and cut a variety of shapes and sizes. For example, when fishing for larger trout, I'll cut longer leech-like tail bait. When fishing for bluegill, I'll use smaller chunks the size of a small maggot. It all depends on what you're going after. Travis, this just sounds like a lot of work. I could just go buy a soft plastic. I mean, well, you could, but you wouldn't get any of the benefits of beaver tail. Beaver tail bait is extremely durable. It is the hardiest bait I've ever fished. Even though the bait looks like fat, it is actually comparable to a piece of rubber. I've had days when I've caught dozens of fish off of one piece and the bait still looked brand new at the end of the day. Beaver tail bait is very oily. When dropped into water, you can see an oil slick that comes from it. Even though I run my beaver tail bait naturally, you can add dyes, scents, or colors to modify the bait to your liking. Because beaver tail bait is a natural bait, you will need to vacuum seal individual bags to use throughout the season. Lastly, one of the greatest benefits of beaver tail bait over other baits or plastics is that beaver tail bait will decompose and feed the fish or birds rather than sit at the bottom of the lake. I honestly hope you all liked the video. If you learned anything from this video or would like to come along for my quest for 1,000 species of fish caught, then go ahead and subscribe to my channel and turn on the notifications so you can get notified when videos get uploaded. Thank you all for subbing, and we'll catch you on the next one.